Hey guys, Steve Washington here with Truthful Hope, and I have our guest and our main host, but our guest here today, Jake Vasquez. I'm super excited to actually be able to speak to you guys about a topic that Jake has been working on for, has it been, I guess, 2 years now, 3 years? Help me with timeline a little bit, Jake.
Yeah, it's been about 2 years. I've been taking my master's in, I think I've said this on the program, but master's in Christian apologetics at Liberty University. It's been so good, just so helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah, the whole time you're learning about different arguments for God and you're trying to figure out, okay, what will my master thesis be on? Because it's 112 pages or so. It's going to be 130 when I'm done, like
Mm.
for I want to publish it as a book, so I'm going to extend it. But yeah, about 2 years. And I was able to defend it last week successfully, which is great. And the professors gave it an A-OK to publish in an academic journal and also potentially as a book. So it's just really exciting stuff.
No, that's great. That's great. And so, just to make sure I'm clear for some of the non-academians out there, of which I would probably hang my hat on. So you go through the master's program, and then you have to pick a specific topic as like an emphasis of study and of research and of development. So, I guess if you could, let's jump right in. Can you tell us about what you studied, why you picked it? Kind of open that up a little bit for us.
Yeah, and the way I'm going to do so is I'm going to share my screen actually, because
Okay.
that'll be the most helpful way. I do have slides that'll be helpful in portraying what it was that my thesis is about. And for our listeners who are not watching the video version, I'll try and speak. I'll try and communicate what's on the slides so you're not lost in the sauce, so to speak. So yeah, this topic is very heavy on my heart, and just to give it some context, I think I've said this on the program before too, but whenever I was, doing my master's in apologetics and really thinking and praying about God, where do you want me? Like apologetics is such a broad range of topics. God, where do you want me to go? How do you want to use me? And he kept putting on my heart as well, it felt that way, abortion. Go into the pro-life movement, go into abortion, fight for the sanctity of life, in a gracious way, representing Christ. And my first thought was like, no, I don't want to do that.
100%.
Super
100%.
tense, like super divisive. Everyone gets
Yes.
mad at each other. It's very,
Yes.
at what it seems like political, but we'll go into why that's not the case. But eventually I came to realize that I myself was almost aborted twice. It's a topic near and dear to my heart. So it's something that I
Absolutely.
was excited to write about and research. And these statistics that you see at the bottom of this slide give it even more value, more weight, more importance. So you can see
73 million abortions taking place every year.
every
Two-
year. That's the World Health
200,000 a day.
Organization. Yep, and
Huh.
then 200,000 per day. And then over 63.4 million abortions occurred legally in the U.S. since January 22nd, 1973. Just to give a illustration of what that means, that's equivalent to the death count of 9/11 happening every day for over 21,316 days.
Mm.
And it's 10 times the amount of Holocaust casualties. I mean, anybody looking at these numbers, anybody should be thinking, "Wow, that's horrible. That's a large number." Now, that's typically the case until it's shown that abortions, what we're talking about is 73 million unborn human beings are killed, and then people automatically start saying, "Oh, well, they're not real human beings." That's exactly what my thesis is about, is to
Hmm.
show that they are real human beings. And if that's the case, my whole thesis hinges on the if the unborn are human beings as morally valuable as you and me, then
Hmm.
abortion becomes not only the leading cause of human death, but also the greatest atrocity to humanity that we've ever seen. And it's a serious issue. So, this is why I always say that abortion is not a political issue. It is quite literally a matter of life or death.
Hmm.
Um, and
Hmm.
there's plenty of different, roads where the abortion debate goes down: rape, incest, bodily autonomy, all these different questions come up, certain rights, and so forth. But I think abortion comes down to one central question, and it's precisely the question that I aim to answer.
Okay.
What is the unborn? And that matters because whether it's moral to kill something or not depends on what it is in the first place. Its value is tied to its inherent nature. So imagine you have kids, Steve. Imagine if they're a
Mm-hmm.
little bit younger than how old they are now, and they
Mm-hmm.
come up to you and they say, come up from behind you, they say, Daddy, Daddy, I killed it. What is the first question you're going to ask?
Kill
What
what?
was it?
Right.
Right? Because if
Right.
it's a spider, okay, good. You
r-
cleared our house of another spider.
Right.
But if it's Nancy's 2-month-old baby from down the street, a
Oof.
serious moral evil has just been done. So this is why Greg Koukl says, I think, so profoundly, if the unborn are not valuable human beings, no justification for abortion is necessary. If it's a parasite, if it's an organ, no problem. You don't have to
Right.
justify removing that.
Right.
If, however, and that big if again, if the unborn are valuable human beings, then no explanation is adequate. So this is why the issue of abortion is not something that Christian, atheist, Hindu, Muslim, anybody should just braze over and overlook as something merely political. It really matters. And I think that this is what I try to do is I try to dive deep into what is the unborn, answering that if.
No, let's go right into that because I told Jake about as we were preparing for this ahead of time that obviously I understand and I think that most people like let's put politics aside because this is not a political show or whatever. So we're putting politics and all those things aside. I think most people would pretty much agree that humans shouldn't kill other humans or whatever. Like I think we're all pretty good to go on that. So I think maybe we have to just figure out how to unpack what is a human, when does it start, how does it start. So I think you're going to go into that some in your presentation. So I guess let's get going. Take us where you want us to go,
Yeah, well, I mean, I was going to just add one more thing.
please.
With this central question, what is the unborn? There's another question, two more questions that actually arise. What is the unborn? So, what does it mean to be human? Right? Like you just said, what does it mean to be a human being? But then also, which worldview adequately explains what we know about humanity? Like, which worldview
What do
can
you mean
really
by that?
So, like, for instance, and this is what my whole thesis is about, like, what worldview can explain humanity? So, if we're saying humans are nothing but particles in motion, but then we also eagerly proclaim that we want to protect and value human beings, well, why? That's an inconsistency on the worldview. So, clearly, there's something valuable about human beings. And if there's another worldview that better explains that, then that is more likely to be true. So
Well,
that's
so
what we're looking at.
can you say that again? You said there's the idea of particles. Say that one more time,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah. So if, let's just say, and this is part of the thesis, but if human beings are just particles in motion,
Hmm.
meaning no intrinsic moral value whatsoever, but we treat human beings as such, it's intuitive to us, and we elevate it.
So
I'll
we
jump.
don't treat human beings that way. You can define it that way, but we don't treat humans that way. And even the person who would make that argument, I guess the argument could be, well, I shouldn't even listen to you because you're just like, what are you? What are we talking about? You're just particles. You're just matter and atoms or something.
Well, consider this: when the pro-choice advocate, what we've all seen this on signs and so forth, they say, "My body, my choice," right? And they're passionate about it. What does that imply? It implies that women have they're intrinsically valuable enough to have these fundamental human right, this right to do what they want with their own body. And to take that away is to infringe upon their rights, and that's a moral evil. So you're implying that there's something valuable about women. And as Christians, we agree. But at least on Christianity, it makes sense. On atheism, it does not make sense. And that's precisely what my thesis is about. So I'll just give you a quick summary of what I argue for here. Is I aim to show that there are certain aspects or facts about humanity that both pro-choicers and pro-lifers agree on that are morally relevant for humanity. But naturalism, the worldview that most atheists and agnostics subscribe to, which is just no God or no supernatural, cannot explain those facts, while Christianity, being the fact that human beings are made in the image of God, can do so much better. And then it follows from that if that's the case, then Christianity is, one, more likely to be true than naturalism, but also if we assume the Christian worldview, then abortion is wrong, and we show that in Scripture. So this is a huge topic, and I'll let you slip in what you wanted to add before going on to the next.
Yeah, no, all I was going to say is like, we do want to make it like absolutely clear that, there are some viewers that, could be listening to this. Like there's always a unique circumstance of a, situation, medical, something to that effect. And like, we're not talking about that. What the emphasis is on here is about, someone voluntarily choosing to take the life of an unborn human based in decision. Is that an appropriate way of how you would define that, Jake?
Yeah, so I would say abortion properly defined is the intentional killing of an unborn child, is the intentional termination of a pregnancy. Termination of pregnancy is literally the unborn being killed.
Yes.
Right. Now, the person might bring up ectopic pregnancies. That is no longer an abortion because you're not intending the death of that unborn human being. And this would include rape and incest, which I go into my thesis. But even that still, for that purpose, you're still intending the death of that unborn human being. And you have to answer the question, well, what is the unborn? Because if they are made in the image of God, like you and I, and they're morally valuable, then their life is valuable. We don't want to take that. Their value has nothing to do with how they were conceived.
Correct.
Right. So
we're not saying that these things are like easy topics or easy circumstance or easy life bringing. But nonetheless, it is still the reality of the situation. We all will fall into, whether we're talking about abortion, whether we're talking about any other sin. Like we'll all fall into an area that's like, man, this is a hard decision. This is a hard life circumstance. But that doesn't then give us the right to exercise on that because of the sheer toughness of it, if you will.
Well, what I argue is your decision making will hinge on this question. What is the unborn? Like that, that will determine what you do and how you answer these questions on, oh, well, I just financially can't afford having a child. Well, that's sad, and the church should be there to help you, certainly. But if that child's made in the image of God, just as valuable as you and I, that's no reason to kill them. Just as much as if my 2-year-old, if I all of a sudden lost my job and lost my house and lost my wife and lost everything, the solution would be to kill my child, even though I still need to provide for her.
No, and that's the thing about principles. Is that, you have to play it all the way out, right? And so like in this situation, like we're like right now we're talking about an unborn child. But then we could be, so if you start okaying that, then we can have like the Holocaust circumstance happen again. We can have like, and I'm probably butchering your presentation, Jake. I'm sorry. But we can start having slavery happen again because like, oh, well, we now have the capacity to define humans. And that's all we're trying to talk about here. We're not like, again, we understand that I grew up in poverty. I understand poverty. I understand like, man, you shouldn't want to bring another child into say a really terrible situation like this. But if the deed is already done, you know what I mean? It's kind of like we wouldn't be having this conversation if the child was 2 years old. In most cases, I would hope, but Jake, I'm gonna just pass the mic completely back to you. I'm not trying to hijack this.
No, you're good. But that's the thing, right? Is when you do make that comparison to a 2-year-old with an unborn child, is they'll usually say, oh, well, that's different. That's exactly what we're tackling. Why is it different? What is the moral difference between the unborn child and a 2-year-old human being? And that's precisely what I aim to tackle in this thesis. And the way I do so like I said, my end conclusion is to say that abortion is wrong because human beings are made in the image of God. And who I'm writing to is the atheist pro-choicer, the one who doesn't believe in God. So you can imagine the weighty endeavor that is, right?
Absolutely.
And this is why I don't start with the conclusion. And I say this explicitly in my thesis, is I want to take the reader on somewhat of a journey, a map, so to speak. And we stop at various secular or non-religious stops or destinations in order that will lead us to that final theological destination, as you see here on this map. So the first one is the pro-choice position. And now I don't talk much about the science. It's mainly philosophical. The reason for that is because scientifically, there's almost no dispute, virtually no dispute, over the fact that the unborn from the moment of fertilization is a human being biologically. Almost no dispute over that. And there's this one quote I'm going to read to you that just blew my mind. It's from a peer-reviewed paper in Issues in Law and Medicine from 2021. And it says this is a quote from the paper. Since a recent study suggested that 80% of Americans view biologists as the group most qualified to determine when a human life begins, experts in biology were surveyed to provide a new perspective to the literature on experts' views on this matter. Biologists from 1,058 academic institutions around the world assessed survey items on when a human life begins, and overall, 96%. That's 5,337 out of 5,577 affirmed the fertilization view. And this is no dispute on the pro-choice side either, scholarly-wise. Peter Singer is probably the most well-known pro-choice philosopher and advocate for infanticide, which is intentionally killing newborns. And he said this: there is no doubt that from the first moments of its existence, an embryo conceived from human sperm and egg is a human being. So you might be thinking, well, what's the problem then? Well, the problem is they distinguish between a human being biologically and a human person with value like you and I. And they say that the unborn is just a potential human person until they have certain characteristics, until they can do certain things, whether it be cognitive, physical, whatever it may be. So what I do in this first chapter is I don't give my opinion. I just give an objectively as possible overview of the pro-choice requirements that they put forth for personhood, such as conscious desires and interests, viability, sentience, brain development. Those are the four things that I look at as an overview and give the reasoning behind those arguments.
Okay.
But what I conclude, and this is important, what I conclude from that analysis is that each of those, and I'll show why in a little bit, each of those assume three basic facts about humanity. They don't argue for it, they assume it. 1, consciousness. 2, rationality. And 3, intrinsic moral value. So you could argue
rationality, and okay.
And moral dignity, you could say. And I'll go into why in a little bit. But the next stop I go to is the pro-life response, or the secular pro-life response. So by secular, again, I mean non-religious, so not invoking God. And this, I think, this is a great way to refute the pro-choice position. I think it does so successfully. Francis Beckwith, we just had him on, and he does so from his book, Defending Life, and he's a Catholic. But he doesn't invoke religion. I think it does just fine. Mm-hmm. What they essentially do, and I'll dive into this a little bit deeper later on, but what he does is he says that human beings from the moment of conception are morally valuable because they share the rational human nature or essence. So it's this non-physical substance that humans share intrinsically. Now, what I concluded from the secular pro-life response as well is it also assumes consciousness, rationality, and intrinsic moral value as morally relevant principles for personhood. Can you explain that without God is the question. Can naturalism, can secularism explain those basic human facts without God? And this matters because, and I was telling you this before the recording, there's a good amount of pro-choice philosophers in the scholarly realm, like Judith Jarvis Thompson, Naomi Wolf at one point, David Boonin, who will say, okay, pro-lifers, secular pro-lifer, even for sake of argument, even if the unborn were a human person, it's still permissible to have an abortion. it's still okay for the woman to carry out that abortion
Who says
because
this?
Judith Jarvis Thompson, David Boonin, Naomi Wolf, they've said this in their writings. Judith Jarvis Thompson most explicitly. She even says, for sake of argument, let's just assume you're right. It's still permissible because of bodily autonomy. Now, what they're doing is they're saying, well, the mother is more valuable than the unborn human being. But this isn't just scholarly. I've posted, you know how fun the comment section is for a lot of our
I do.
clips, and
I do.
I've seen when I post on abortion, it comes up way too often. They say, who cares? Who cares
Hmm.
if it's a human being?
Hmm.
Doesn't matter.
Hmm.
And that's a dangerous place to
100%.
be as a
100%.
society because, and you know this, because now what we're doing is we're dehumanizing. We're saying, well, even if you're a human being, you don't matter as much as that person.
Right.
You don't
Yeah,
have
no,
that same value.
it's dangerous, because right now it's nice when you have the machine gun pointed out at somebody else, but if the machine gun is just on auto shoot and then it flips around to you, then it's a problem.
Right.
It's bad philosophy.
It's bad. And yeah, it's a serious problem when we start losing the grounds for the sanctity and sacredness of life, human life, I should say. We go into some pretty dark areas, and this is why I think this is so important. This is why my final conclusion is that the best way to ground human personhood is rooted in God. And I hope by the end of this thesis that the reader comes away with thinking it's reasonable to invoke God. And we should be invoking God. Pro-lifers should be more adamant in bringing God into the conversation because ultimately it's what serves as ground. So when David Boonin and Naomi Wolf and all the commenters say, so what? I say, because they are made in the image of God just as much as the mother. Pro-life doesn't mean mom over baby. Pro-life means mom and baby. But the because is big, because they are made in the image of God. So that's kind of why I think this is so important. So like I said, so we have those three basic human facts, right? Consciousness, rationality, intrinsic moral value. So the thought behind this is if a worldview is to be true to reality, it should explain those three basic human facts. Pretty straightforward. So in my third chapter, this is like the metaphysical chapter, which just looks into the nature of things, really. And what I aim to show is that these three facts are actually defeaters on naturalism, meaning they cannot be explained, and they actually falsify the worldview. So at this point, I hope the reader's thinking, well, if naturalism can't explain it, then what can? Glad you asked. I personally think that theism, the view that God exists, and specifically the Christian view that human beings are made in the image of God, which is in the Old and New Testament, best explains these three facts because this shows that human beings were made in the image of a conscious, rational, good being, God. So I think it's the best explanation. And that's kind of how I try and go about it throughout my thesis.
That's good.
And this is just a way to differentiate the two views. So the pro-choice, I call I don't call it, it's called the performance-based view, PBV, which essentially says you are what you can do.
You
Right?
are what you can do.
What you can do. So if you could think, if you're viable, if you're sentient, if you could do certain things, if you have certain functionality, then you are valuable. And this is seen by Katha, I think Pollitt is her last name. She's a pro-choicer. She said, it, referring to the unborn, has no brain, no blood, no head, no organs or limbs. It cannot think, feel, perceive, or communicate. They are potential persons. Yes, but that is not the same thing as an actually being one. So there you have it, right? You're a potential person, therefore it's okay to kill you. But if you're a real person, you've had these characteristics already possessed. So that's the thinking there.
And you may not know the answer to this, but this woman, like she says, that has no brain, has no blood, no head. So is she specifically pro-choice when it, like up to a certain age or certain weeks? Because obviously, at some points, the baby does have head and blood and organs and all the things.
I don't know her personal views, but I do know that's a great question. because a lot of times people will raise certain arguments in which the unborn will eventually have these things.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Like, so,
You didn't
and
just
it's
come out and then it's like, oh, your organs, they developed in the air.
right. But a good a good comparison to that is like when people bring up rape and incest, and they say, "Well, what do you do about rape?" Right? And it's known that the rape instance of abortion only happens less than 1% of the time. That is known. So I say to them, I say, okay, before answering, I say, for sake of argument, let's say we only make abortion legal for instances of rape. Are you then okay with joining the pro-life movement?
Right.
And almost every time they say no, because that's not the real issue. The real issue is you want women to have the ability to freely, intentionally choose to have an abortion. And I'm saying, no, that's wrong. So I think the same thing kind of goes with this is, and you see this, like, some pro-choicers will advocate for one view as being the marker for personhood. Others, like Mary Ann Warren, which I'll get into in a little bit, she lists 5 criteria for personhood. And it's like, she lists consciousness, rationality, all these other things. So you got to have the whole bunch. It's like, well, I don't expect my 2-year-old to run a marathon, but that doesn't
Correct.
make her any less morally relevant.
Correct.
So it's just doing what 2-year-olds do.
Yep.
So that's the pro-choice performance-based view. On the other hand, the substance view, as I already mentioned, pretty much says personhood is about what you are, not what you can do.
What
so
you
your
are
value,
now. Okay. I understand.
right? So your value is tied to what you are, your inherent value. That's what protects you. That's what you are. Hey everyone, just wanted to pause here for a minute and thank you for listening to the Truthful Hope podcast. We hope you've been enjoying the episode so far. To help us with our mission of sharing the hope of Christianity with as many people as possible, please consider subscribing to our podcast and leaving your thoughts and questions in the comments. You could find us on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Furthermore, if you'd like to make a monetary contribution, please consider donating at truthfulhope.com/donate. As a 501c3 nonprofit, your donation may be tax deductible and you'll receive a receipt for your records. Thanks again, and now back to the show.
It'll be interesting to know, and it's going off topic. That'll be like my nickname or something.
Yeah,
but it will be interesting to know how far some of these thoughts are kind of carried out. Like, in other words, like right now we're talking about. Can you repeat that? You said, or I guess I can read it here. It's about what you are, not what you can do.
Mm-hmm.
And so it'll be interesting, just in relationships, like how one treats people. And I'm not trying to, like, look, it's okay to have like a difference of opinion, to be, kind of processing things through. I'm not justifying it. I'm not condoning it. I'm not okaying it. But, according to our own worldview, we live in a world where God allows people to even oppose him and oppose his ideas. So I'm not like, I'm not like getting rid of the person who has an opposing point of view. But it would be interesting to just know, like, so if you carry this idea that people don't necessarily have intrinsic value, then, like, do you carry that out in your day-to-day life too? Like, we talked about that in abortion, but how does that work with, like, I don't know. I think about, and I'm sorry, Jake, I'm going way off topic, but I think about, like, sometimes when I'm driving down the road and people are like cutting me off, or people are, I don't know, just doing whatever. And there's like a part of me that, will rise up and just be like, oh my gosh, like, whatever. But it's like, well, you know what? I don't know what's going on with them. Maybe they had a terrible day. Maybe they, I don't know, had something going on. Maybe it's an emergency. Maybe their mom just passed away, or because these are things that literally happen, and but I also feel like I see some people in their driving, and I'm just using driving as an example, that it's like, it really does seem like all they care about is themselves, and I don't know this for sure. I don't live in their head. I can't say with certainty. But sometimes, and when you meet people, like, just very self-centered, you know what I mean? And you'll see that across the board. You'll see that. I know people who, like, I don't know, like, don't tip at like a restaurant or whatever, and they're like, well, they chose to work here. And it's like, yeah, but this is our country. This is the way that our system works. You chose to come to a place where you are expected to give something, but they feel justified, and I don't have to. Do you think that? I don't know. You have any feedback on this, Jake? I'm just kind of out here in space at this point, I guess.
Well, that's what I try and that's what I'm trying to bring about, right? The question I'm not trying to prove, this isn't a thesis that proves Christianity is true, right? I'm really just thinking in the moment of more of a modest approach, like, hey, let's just ask these questions. Like, do the way that we live our lives, do the things that we know to be true, are they consistent with our worldview? And if not, wouldn't that mean we need to get a new worldview?
Mm. So
or live consistently with our worldview, which would not be good if you're a naturalist.
So unpack that. Does the way we live our lives, you said, is it consistent with our worldview? Can you say that a different way just to make sure I'm clear on that? So does the worldview part, so does the way we live our lives, is it consistent with
what we believe to be true about reality?
Gotcha.
Right?
Gotcha. So how our day-to-day life works, how it acts out. Got it.
And this is what I bring about, and I'll just show you. I'll jump ahead a little bit. I'll leave it here. Let me go back to this. So on number 3, on chapter 3, the foundational crisis, what I raise is called a recalcitrant fact. And recalcitrant just means a fact that is a defeater on someone's worldview. Like, it cannot be explained. So, and the recalcitrant facts are what I mentioned: consciousness, rationality, and intrinsic moral value. So what I'm trying to show at some point is, if you are a pro-choice advocate like Peter Singer is, for instance, and this is what's going to this slide here. If you are a Peter Singer and he believes that sentience is the marker for personhood.
Sentience?
And sentience, so the ability to feel pain or experience pleasure. Also have like self-awareness over time. And he believes that until you have that, you are not a human person. You're a potential person, and abortion is legal. But what else does he say by that? Because the newborn also does not have sentience. The newborn is not sentient. So he's consistent. Wait, let me just, he says, then the newborn can also be killed. He is an advocate for infanticide.
Why would he think a newborn doesn't have the capacity to feel pain?
I mean, well, they don't have, I guess what he was saying, they don't have the developed ability for sentience. So, and that's actually a great question. And that goes into our consciousness dilemma a little bit, is you're trying to describe a first-person introspection. You're trying to diagnose something that's subjective, which is very hard, right?
I've never, and for the sake of, because I know we have a lot of listeners that listen, thank God,
thank God.
who have all sorts of different points of view, and I welcome that. We both welcome that. But I just want to make sure, for the sake of like not misconstruing his point of view, he's saying that a newborn doesn't have the conscious capacity to feel pain.
Yeah, they're not sentient. And he lives that out, and he works that out the way he does. He actually, this was years ago, but he was saying that infanticide is permissible for like a year or so.
Dang.
But then on about 10 years ago, I think it was, but on a debate with Dr. Richard Weikart, who we had on our program, and I talked to him about it on our program, he debated Peter Singer about personhood. So you could watch that. It's on the Unbelievable podcast with Justin Brierley. It's on YouTube. And Dr. Weikart pressed him on it. He said, well, then when do you think someone becomes a human person?
100%.
Like, he pressed him. He said, when is it? And Singer then he retracted his view. He said, oh, well, I used to believe it was about a year, but now I don't know. It could be in any time. We need to figure it out still. And I'm thinking, like, guys, go back with me to that first slide. 70 million human beings are being killed in the womb. And we're sitting here thinking, oh, we'll figure it out. Like, this is something that needs to be ironed out before we do the killing, not after. Yeah. The implications are too large. It's not like, oh, I don't know what color house I want to buy. Like, that you figure out because there's no significant implications, but we're taking human life in the meantime.
Hmm.
So that
Wow.
would be a recalcitrant fact here, is that sentience, to your very point, what does it assume? It assumes the existence of consciousness or self-awareness. To be sentient is to be conscious, consciously self-aware of various first-person experiences like pleasures and pain. So if you're Peter Singer, you're a naturalist who's also an advocate, outspoken advocate for Darwinian evolution. If you're going to base when we can kill someone or not on sentience and just assume consciousness without arguing for it, I have a big problem with that. Because maybe your worldview can't explain it because it's not true.
Right.
Right. But then,
And again, when does it stop? Because it's I think about, I don't know, I just have an image in my head of someone who speaks another language or whatever than you, and it's like, nah, they don't really understand what's going on, like, and it's like, just like you talked about, of assuming this first person. How did you phrase it? Uh, you said
first
something
person
about,
introspection.
yes, and it's like, oh well, because I don't know what they're talking about, I assume that they don't know what they're talking about. It's like, no, I just don't know the language. That's it,
Well,
or
also
whatever.
think about where else has this been, where else has this been practiced? Think about
Oh,
Nazi Germany, the
100%,
Holocaust, right?
100%.
Well, and this is in my thesis. Dr. Weikart did this research, but it wasn't just the 6 million Jews that died. Like, that's not where the killing started. The killing started about 10 to 20 years prior, when there was some writer in Germany who coined the term life unworthy of life. And it was the disabled human beings. It was certain human beings that didn't meet this standard of humanity. So they were unworthy of life.
Hmm.
And then it
Hmm.
just bled into Jews because Hitler thought the Jews were a threat to humanity.
Mm-hmm.
There's no boundary anymore because you've already determined that human equality doesn't exist.
Hmm.
And if we want to take that here in the United States, which our Constitution was formed against that worldview, because we are endowed with certain rights and liberty and the right to life and all these things by our Creator.
Mm-hmm.
If we want to bring that here, we better be ready for some horrible implications if lived out consistently.
100%. And and as obviously as a black man, like, I have to speak to that in a sense of, like, somebody's like, hey Steve, how are you just listening to this, and like, slavery happened post Constitution, and it's like, absolutely, like, these weren't good actors that engaged in this, and this is precisely what we're talking about.
Right,
Or
right.
whatever, like, we're precisely talking about not having the capacity to label who is a full human and who's 3/5 of a human, and because these are the sort of outcomes that could happen with something like this.
And along those lines, this is off topic.
Yep.
Might take us a little longer here.
I know that's where I dwell, apparently.
Margaret Sanger, founder of Planned Parenthood, she was outspokenly racist.
Yes.
Like, clearly against black people. Did not like
Correct.
them at all. Put
Correct.
Planned Parenthoods in black neighborhoods for a reason.
Correct.
To eliminate the population of black people. And you might say, as an atheist,
cut from the same cloth. That's the whole thing. That is all cut from the exact same cloth.
Exactly. So as an atheist, you say Margaret Sanger was wrong. And I'm pressing you to say, why was she wrong? Why was she wrong? As a Christian, I can say why she was wrong. Because all human beings, despite your race, political view, gender, disability, no matter what, you are made in the image of God, whether you believe in him or not. I have to love you and respect you as an
100%.
image bearer of God. So it is wrong to kill you. It is wrong to kill an innocent image bearer of God. Now, as an atheist, you don't have that option. So that's exactly what I'm trying to argue in this thesis. Is I'm trying to pull out those deeper questions, because a lot of what I'm seeing on like political debates and social media and my comment section, it's so surface level. It's so like we're just assuming these things. Like, I'll just run through these quickly. Sentience assumes consciousness, conscious desires and interests. That quite literally assumes consciousness as well, because to have a desire or interest, you have to be consciously aware of that.
Right. Right.
Viability, the point of when you could survive outside of the womb, that assumes intrinsic moral value because it assumes that viable human beings are valuable and non-viable human beings are
Ah,
not. But by
right,
what standard are you
right,
judging that on?
right, right,
Enough to kill them even. And
right.
then brain development, same exact problem. You assume intrinsic moral value because humans with a developed brain is now intrinsically valuable, and then humans without a developed brain is not.
Mm,
Again, by what standard are we
right,
going by? It's just
right,
arbitrary.
right. Hmm.
So
Good.
it's a big problem. And then I mentioned Mary Ann Warren before, but she lists 5 reasons, and her first two, reasons, which she deems as requirements, by the way. The other 3 she says maybe, maybe not, but these first 2 she says are requirements for personhood: consciousness and reasoning. And she said if you don't have those, you do not make it into the moral community.
Oof.
What did she just specify? Those 3 facts that we've already laid out: consciousness, rationality, intrinsic moral value. So I'm just trying to collect. It's kind of like if you know Habermas and Shaw's work on the resurrection, it's kind of like the minimal facts argument, where I'm collecting the minimal facts and I'm trying to ask what best explains these facts. But I'm also raising on top of that, the implications are really significant because people are dying as we have this conversation.
100%.
Um,
100%.
so let's just dive into consciousness, right? The first one. This is a recalcitrant fact, the problem with consciousness. As I mentioned, Mary Warren listed it as one of her things.
What's recalcitrant mean?
So
I'm trying not to
recalcitrant's like,
butcher the name.
yeah, recalcitrant is just like a defeater. It's a
Okay.
fact that is falsified on a view. Can't be explained. So what is consciousness? And it's a weird question to ask because it's so subjective. It's like when you're waking up from the hospital, just getting off of anesthesia, like you then know what consciousness is as you start feeling certain sensations and coming back into a conscious state until you realize you're in a hospital room. But that's a process, and you know what that's
100%.
like.
100%.
But you could define it as a raw, qualitative, first-person, what it is like feeling of sensations, thoughts, beliefs, and desires. It's all subjective, right? Now, the naturalist, who believes that all things are natural, most likely, more than not, believes in what's called physicalism, which is that everything is physical matter. There's no non-physical things. But consciousness is surely non-physical. You're not going to open up my brain and see my desire to play baseball or my desire to love my wife. You're just going to see
Right.
neurons firing.
Right.
J.P. Moreland, he lists 5 reasons why consciousness or mental states are not physical. He says there's a raw qualitative feel, or what it's like to have a mental state such as pain. At least many mental states have intentionality, so ofness or aboutness. Mental states are inner, private, and immediate to the subject having them. Mental states require a subjective ontology. So what does that mean? That means that they're necessarily owned by the first-person sentient subjects who have them. That goes back to what you were raising about Singer's view. And then lastly, they fail to have crucial features that characterize physical states. They're not spatial. They don't extend into space. They can't be located anywhere like you can describe a chair or something of that sort. Consciousness you can't put it anywhere. So for this reason, consciousness is not merely physical. And this goes into self-awareness as well. Self-awareness it's a first-person specific thing. It's not descriptive in these third-person ways that we would describe like a chair or an object. So, and if human beings were merely identical with our brains, which some naturalists will say, that's absurd. And it's absurd because brain and body, for example, could be present in percentages. Like there's a lot of people, Dr. Michael Egnor, the neurosurgeon who wrote the book, The Immortal Mind, he showed that he's done 7,000 brain surgeries. And he knows personally of people who are walking around with 80% of their brain missing. Or even more or less. Like you don't have 100% of your brain. If we were identical with our brains, we would have to conclude that they're only 20% of a person? Like, that's foolish. We know that they're a whole person. They're just missing parts of their brain. So Moreland says, J.P. Moreland, he says, I am an all or nothing kind of thing. I am not divisible. I cannot be present in percentages. And I think that's 100% true. So, and I engage with various objections to this, like emergentism. A lot of people in the comments section have said, like, oh, consciousness just arises from the brain being complex in a certain way. But that's explain that. Like, that just seems like you're restating the problem. You're just saying because the brain works, then boom, immaterial conscious states appear. Like,
Right.
that's not an explanation.
Right.
You have to explain how that works. To associate the brain with this like special ability of consciousness that no other organ can do without sufficient reason seems more like special pleading than anything substantial. So it really doesn't answer the question. And then some will say it's a brute fact, it just is what it is, but that begs the question, why should we believe you?
Absolutely.
And then an illusion, atheist, I think his name is Daniel Dennett. He passed, I believe. But he said consciousness is illusion. He's like, it doesn't exist. But the irony behind that is you need to be conscious to know you're having an illusion.
100%.
You can't,
100%.
only conscious people have illusions, so
Hmm.
it doesn't work.
Hmm.
So that's just the first recalcitrant fact. Did you have any thoughts on that one before I go on to the second one?
No, let's go to the second.
Okay. The second one is rationality, and this is Warren lists this as well in her list. And also, the pro-lifer will also raise, as I mentioned before, the rational human nature. So there's something about rationality that's morally relevant. But can naturalism explain this? And this is where C.S. Lewis, I think, says something profound. In his book Miracles, he says, strict materialism refutes itself for the reason given long ago by Professor Haldane. If my mental processes are determined wholly by motions of atoms in my brain, I have no reason to suppose that my beliefs are true. And hence I have no reason for supposing my brain to be composed of atoms. Naturalism discredits our processes of reasoning, or at least reduces their credit to such a humble level that it can no longer support naturalism itself. It's such a powerful argument, and it's the argument from reason. And some of our listeners may be aware of this. C.S. Lewis brought it into the square, and then many others have developed it. I like Alvin Plantinga's view, and this is the one I lay out in the thesis. But Alvin Plantinga essentially shows if you can't reliably trust your beliefs, your reasoning, then you can't reliably believe or trust your belief in naturalism or evolution.
100%.
So it's just self-refuting.
100%.
Um, so that's a big problem for
Hmm.
naturalism. And
Hmm.
what about intrinsic moral value? We talked about this already, but as I mentioned, my body, my choice means something. It has implications. It means the woman's valuable. And as a Christian, I agree she is valuable. But I also think that the unborn child is valuable. So yes, do whatever you want to your body, tattoos, piercings, whatever. But you can't kill another human being.
Right.
But on
Right.
naturalism, where does that value come from? Where does that distinction between human being and non-human being having value, where does that come from? Um, and this is really the basis of the objection from Boonin and Wolf and Thompson of, well, even if the human being, unborn's a human being, so what? This is what it comes down to. The so what is because they're made in the image of God. And Singer, writing with another pro-choice and pro-infanticide advocate, Helga Kuss, said in their book, this is not quoted directly, but this is just from a few of their pages together, a summarization, that the only possible way to justify human equality and intrinsic unique moral worth is indeed by the metaphysical grounding of the Judeo-Christian doctrine of the Imago Dei. It's exactly my point of the thesis, is what I'm trying to show. Now they go in to try and show ways that you can do this without God, without invoking God, but they all just seem to fail because they don't have sufficient grounding.
Yeah, you mentioned about like the my body, my choice. Um, and again, I'll just keep it here. Um, I find it interesting that the very people who are arguing, uh, say to have a choice to, to abort and to kill a human being is a person who wasn't aborted and who wasn't killed, and it's like, well, you obviously are a benefactor of not being aborted. And I already know where the argument would go. The argument would say like, well, if I were aborted, then just so be it. then I would be fine with that. And it's like, then that begs, and it's, I guess, goes deeper into philosophy, well above my pay grade. But it's hard to know how you would feel about something that
That's
you've
it.
never experienced.
That's it. You have to have life to feel or be fine with anything. You can't just
Correct.
say I would be fine with that. You
Correct.
wouldn't be alive.
Correct.
You wouldn't have a
Correct.
chance.
And
Like you're saying that from a standpoint of being alive.
correct. And you know, somebody may still want to get very hot and heavy on that, and they're like, no, I would be fine. Of which my argument or thought would be, well, like everybody's experienced like tough life. Everybody has experienced pain and challenges and all these things, but you chose not to exit life.
Mm-hmm.
You still wanted to stay here, and so it's like, well, if life's not that big of a deal, um, and you have the capacity to decide who's here and who's not here, you still want to stay here, and I don't know. I just think that that's interesting to make such a position of like, hey, I can decide who's here, who's not here. It's not significant. They're not a person. They're not all these things, but yet and still you want to stay here.
And this recently came up in a back and forth on a comment section I had with somebody, with a pro-choicer, and they were saying that personhood's rooted in sentience, like Peter Singer. And I went through some of the objections to that some of which we talked about here. And I ended my comment, I was like, I'm thankful. It was around Thanksgiving. I was like, I'm thankful that you're alive to be able to have this conversation with me. I think all other human beings deserve that same right. And I think that's so true. And he didn't like that, but I think it's true. I think, why are we to judge that someone should die? An innocent human being should die? So there's serious implications to this. And this is why I think the better explanation than naturalism, which I do not think can explain these basic human facts, is the Imago Dei, the Christian doctrine that human beings were made in the image of God. And that's from Genesis 1:26 through 27. I think also James, it's either 2 or 3:9, but one of the two.
And so for somebody who doesn't know what that means, what does that mean that humans were made in the image of God? Like, do they look like God? Or like, what does that mean?
No, so we don't look like that. And I go into some depth about this in the thesis. So when it's released or when it's published, wherever it will be published, I will recommend they go read that. But in short, Dr. Michael Heiser, who recently passed, I think he says it best. It's not just an ability we have, but a status that we are given. To be human is to image God. So we are to image him. So what does that mean? We are supposed to be like him in many ways. And that comes with certain responsibilities. We are to subdue the earth and take care of things. And we're supposed to love one another and treat our others with respect. And it also comes with some intrinsic value because we are rooted in the ultimate good. We are in his image. We're unique among creation. So human beings then are made in the image of God, and this serves as a superior explanation because, as you see to the right here, for consciousness, we are conscious beings because we are made in the image of a conscious personal creator. Pretty straightforward. For rationality, we possess reliable reason because our minds are patterned after a supremely rational being. Also straightforward. And then for intrinsic value, our value is not functional or emergent, it is endowed, as our founding fathers held. It is intrinsic because our relationship to the Creator is essential to our very being, not an accidental property. Now, I explore all of these in much more depth. This is just like a summary of each of my points in the thesis. The thesis is like 112 pages, so this is all drawn out more. But I love this quote that I included, and I'm going to say it here. It's not too short, but it's not too long either. It's by John David Danielson. He said, "What our secular society today considers to be universal human rights are in fact based entirely on Christian moral precepts that are universal only insofar as Christianity is a universal faith, intended for all people in all places. But the moral precepts themselves are uniquely Christian, and chief among them is perhaps the doctrine of Imago Dei, the foundational belief that every human being is created in the image and likeness of God, and therefore not only possesses inherent dignity and worth, but also has the capacity, through human reason and free will, to know and love God, to be transformed by God's grace, and to participate in the divine life. I just think that's such a good quote because it's so true. It grounds it back
100%.
to what humans are, and that's that we are made in the image of God.
100%. And you're living in that bliss in reality,
Yes.
even though you're making a judgment about whether somebody else should or should not be in that same reality.
And it's true even if you don't believe it.
100%.
That's kind of what I'm trying to show here. And that's, when pro-lifers or, try to restrain themselves from bringing God into the conversation, it kind of bothers me because even though the atheist doesn't believe it or like it, it doesn't make Christianity any less true. And I know you can argue sufficiently, and I don't want to come off as like I'm anti-pro-life movement. I think the pro-life view, even without invoking God, works. Does a great job. It's philosophically sound. It makes sense. But I think we can go deeper, and I think we can address these serious problems about losing the sanctity of life by bringing God into the conversation. So my final, but now we're taking it down here. My final argument that I propose in my thesis is kind of long, but it's a logical argument. So it has premises and then a conclusion. So I'll read it here. It's both pro-choice, it's not in the slide, but both pro-choice and pro-life advocates commonly appeal to consciousness, rationality, and human dignity as morally relevant characteristics for personhood, either explicitly or implicitly. Naturalism fails to adequately account for the existence of and reliability of consciousness, rationality, and human dignity. Theism, and specifically the Christian doctrine that human beings are made in the image of God, more sufficiently provides ontological grounding, or explains, consciousness, rationality, and human dignity than naturalism. Therefore, the probability of Christianity being true is higher than that of naturalism. So, assuming the Christian worldview, all human beings are made in the image of God. I'm going to list scripture. Genesis 1:27, James 3:9. Unborn human beings are human beings made in the image of God. Psalm 139:13 through 16, Luke 1:41 through 44. It is wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being made in the image of God, for this is one of the things God hates. Exodus 20:13, Proverbs 6:16 through 17. Abortion is the intentional killing of an innocent human being made in the image of God in the womb. Therefore, abortion is morally wrong. So premises 1 through 4, I'm just showing why the Christian worldview is more probable than naturalism. And then from that, we assume the Christian worldview and we show that abortion is impermissible. It's kind of tight. We talked about this before the recording, but there are Christians who hold to pro-choice views, and I think they're wrong. And I'm adding a section in the thesis to show why from Scripture there's no room for being pro-choice whatsoever. And I don't do that in the thesis I have now because there's a limit of space that I could do.
100%.
But when I'm hoping to publish it as a book, and that's when I'll include that. And I just want to end on this, and we talked about this as being a really important part prior to the recording, and I totally agree. And this is why I had to include it in the thesis: is everything we just talked about, everything we just went over. It is not merely an explanation. It's not merely a philosophical ideal of this is better than naturalism, therefore I'm done. It's a solution. Because according to a poll in 2020, approximately 63% of Americans personally know someone who's had an abortion. And 71% of women between the ages 18 and 49 say they know someone close to them who has had an abortion, including themselves. So you don't have to, given that guilt and that pain, you don't have to dig deeper into that sin. You don't have to support abortion just because you know someone who had one or you yourself has had one. There is forgiveness in Christ. Christianity is, again, it's not just a philosophy. It's literally the solution to the guilt and the sins that we feel and do. That's why Paul said in Romans, there is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. There's forgiveness with him. So ultimately, You asked me before the recording, what is your major take home? And my major take home is this right here, is that people come to Christ and they accept all of what that means. It means no abortion, and it means that you're forgiven in the same sense.
That's good. That's super good.
So I'll stop sharing there because that was a lot. But
no, I think I think it's definitely gave us all a lot to think about, a lot to ponder.
I just hope to add something to the conversation. Like I said, my approach, my goal here is modest. Let's just think about these things. Like,
absolutely,
what are we doing here?
Absolutely,
and what matters?
That's good. As as all of us, all are all listeners, all people who thank God weren't aborted.
Yeah.
Amen
to that.
So
amen to that.
No, that's good. Jake, any other final pieces before we wrap up for today?
No, I would just say, don't be afraid to invoke God in the abortion conversation. I know it's a lot because when you talk to like an atheist or a non-believer, the first thing you're going to hear is, oh, wow, here we go. You're forcing your morality on me, or you're doing all this. Listen, all laws legislate morality. That's what it means to be a law. So it's not about if someone forces their morality, it's what that morality is that matters.
Yes.
So we want to make sure that the morality that we're enforcing is accurate to reality. And if this is the case, if they can't explain consciousness, rationality, and intrinsic moral value, then what can they explain? Because a lot of what we believe stems from those three facts. Actually,
That's
to
good.
believe anything is to be conscious and rational.
100%. 100%.
So I just hope it encouraged some further conversation. I'm pretty stoked about it. I was really nervous about defending it, but the professors, they found it to be pretty substantial.
No, this was great. This was a lot of good work put in here. And I know that there were a lot of terms and ideas and concepts and things shared today. So we encourage. That's what the comment section is for. So we encourage it. We're not looking to go through great debates over comments or whatever. However, if somebody does have a legitimate conversation that wants to be had, we're happy to even have it offline. It's not about debating an idea. It's about a conversation should be about the in pursuit of truth. And it's like, okay, so is our goal to pursue truth or is our goal to be right? And it's like, no, let's pursue truth. Let's have a conversation on this. So, Jake, really appreciate all the time and hard work and energy that you put into this. And look forward to getting together on our next topic for sure.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, perfect. So, Truthful Hope audience, appreciate you guys being here, hanging in there with us today. And we look forward to catching you on our next one.
All right. God bless, guys.
God bless, guys.